and crime in countries all over the world is way down. You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in, and all over the world, crime is down all over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse me,
President
the
Harris,
FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out.
I think the same thing.
Coming from someone who has been prosecuted.
She's like more calm,
for
more collected than
national
Trump.
security
You know what I mean?
crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault.
hitting
and
like
his
some
next
very
big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear.
She's
where
hitting
each
some
person
really hard
stands
ones too,
on
but it's
the
like
issue
they're
of what is
facts. They're
important
just
about
facts.
respect for the rule
You
of
literally
law
did this
and
to
respect for
yourself,
law
kind of
enforcement.
thing. Like
The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President, response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place.
That's
The
a
United
crazy
States
thing to
Supreme
say.
Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people.
Vice President
stop
Harris,
him.
thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy. With a fake Russia investigation.
that he
went
had.
nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work, to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down. And name-calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, you're
1000% I agree with that statement.
I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father.
Brother, now he's going to try and
piggyback
off of that.
A fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I've built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised.
Favorite words.
So we don't have to talk about
the favorite 2 words. His favorite 2 words,
defund
bro.
the police. She's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day 1. Just to finish, one thing so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead. We'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out of it. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that
for
we
the
have to get to.
environment.
President, in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, oh, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet. That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted? When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America, they're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world. And crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just
when are those, David, when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle? They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask
you. You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big.
Oh, so now you want to have no liability.
Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, this is going to be a very big
rally, that had
rally,
nothing
or
to
whatever
do
you
with
want to
me.
call
I
it.
did nothing.
And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want...
Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome.
I will be back tomorrow.
And be clear
or like,
on that point.
Maybe later.
Donald
okay,
Trump,
how about
the
this?
candidate, has said in this
be
election
on, like,
there will
later.
be a bloodbath.
But I will only be on
if
Twitch.
This and the outcome of this election is
so
not to
if
his
you want
liking.
to find me,
let's turn the page
might be
on
like
this.
past
Let's
midnight,
not
so
go
like
back.
2
Let's
hours or
chart
so.
a course
I might be back
for
on
the future.
stream.
And not go.
I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The president of the United States, you'll get him out of bed. You'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Right. You'll say, come on down to the office. Let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed.
Mr.
Those
President,
people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue to both of you because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I said that sarcastically. You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them Republican.
No judge looked at it.
And said
they
there was
said
no
we didn't have
widespread
standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
Well, we've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris in December,
This is an interesting
said,
topic.
quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. Yes. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that.
Yes, oh my God.
Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way,
Who gives a shit about if it started or if it didn't?
Ukraine and killed
How would you fix it?
Millions of people when you add it up. Far worse than people understand what's going on over there.
Oh.
But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was
talking about. We're talking about how are you going to fix it?
The sorority party.
Why? How are you bringing up other things?
If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years
this
from
guy
now.
does not know how to debate,
bro. I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had.
Okay, how
Iran
are you
had
gonna
no money
fix
for
it?
Hamas or Hezbollah
Stop
or any
talking
of the
about the
28
past. The
different,
past isn't the past. We're talking
spheres
about the
of
future.
terror, and they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They
I
had no
don't get
money.
it. Why
It
does
was
he
a big
continue
story,
talking
and you
about
know
this
it. You covered
crap?
it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Get it done.
Bro, I see why people want this dude in the fucking election
President Harris,
polls and everything. Because, bro, he just
That's
just
absolutely
talks
not
about
true.
so much
I
stuff.
have my entire career and
He
life
didn't even answer the
supported
question.
Israel and the
He
Israeli
didn't even
people.
answer the
He knows
question.
that he's trying to
Bro,
again
he
divide
basically put
and
himself through a
distract
bunch of
from the
crap
reality,
just
which
to
is,
not
it
answer a
is very
question.
well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on
He
national
just put
security and foreign
so
policy.
much
It is well
crap.
known that he admires dictators.
This is all he
wants to be a
did.
dictator
He
on
had
day
no
one, according
answering
to
to that
himself.
question.
It is well known that he said of It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he
She has
exchanged
to
love
push
letters with Kim
other
Jong-un.
things because that's all
And it
he
is
wants to talk about.
absolutely well known
So now she has
that
to
these
completely
dictators and
debate about
autocrats
something
are
that has
rooting
nothing to do
for
with
you
what we're
to be
talking
president
about.
again because they're
For
so
them
clear.
to just
They can
get back into the
manipulate
topic.
you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on
Vice
national
President
security,
Harris.
including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
True. It's kind of wild Trump is being a little more reserved than normal, but I swear the looping back is making it such a... Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that is true. Like, she's not letting him continue going on and on and on about the same thing, about the same things that he wants to talk about. But at the same time, he just continues doing it and doing it and doing it. And he tries to go back to the same thing about what they were talking about beforehand. And then it would just be like, okay. Like, what else? Like, he didn't even answer that question that they asked him where they were like, so how are you thinking of resolving the issues between Hamas and and Israel? I think that's the big reason he isn't getting as loud as normal with as Hillary would battle him, but Kamala is like, oh well, yeah. He deflected multiple questions though. Yeah. He did deflect like a bunch of questions. He deflected so many questions. Like a lot of the questions that they would ask him, he would just go and say something else. Like, you know what I mean? Like it'll be like, what? Why are you just deflecting completely what you were what they were asking you? Like you're not being honest about what you're trying to say.
It has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect.
do it.
And what I'll do is I'll
do
speak to
it.
one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have...
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to defy one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch?
Please, I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow much happier than he is
telling
right
a
now.
woman to stay
But
quiet?
eventually, you know, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that.
kidding,
He's got
by the way,
nuclear
but
weapons. Nobody
you
ever
know what
thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening, but he does have that. Something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin.
We're going back to
and
this.
she did. And the
That's
war
the
started
past.
3 days later.
What are
And
you
that's
gonna
the kind
get
of
to
talent
do
we
to
have with
stop
her.
it?
She's worse than Biden, in my opinion. I think he's the worst president
Can
in
you
the
give
history of
me
our country.
an
She goes
explanation?
down as the worst
You know,
vice
give me
president in the
something
history of our country. But let me
that
tell you
will make
something.
me feel like,
She
oh,
is a
okay, maybe he knows what he's talking about,
negotiator.
but no,
They
how
sit-
he's
Vice
gonna
President
do
Harris,
to
have you
fix.
ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you
this
clarify
point.
tonight?
I have not heard
Yet
it.
again, I said it at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And
Bro,
that is another
literally.
one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, I've now met with him over 5 times. The reality is it has been about standing as America always should, as a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is commander-in-chief, and the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of
Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this, and the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not again appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President, Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black." I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think it's, I mean, honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me Can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman, she says. She is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad, and she can't get away with that.
Thank you. Your time is up.
I want to respond to that, though. I want to just respond briefly. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, one who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people.
Yes.
I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice President
and move
Harris.
forward.
Plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
she
we
has
do
a
have to
plan
move
to
on to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere
Okay, what's your
else.
plan,
That's
Trump?
what her plan is.
Okay, what's your plan, Trump?
I just need
Lindsay,
to
go ahead.
respond.
All right,
what's your plan,
President
Trump?
President
Tell
has
me what's your
said
plan.
something twice that I need to
Tell me
respond.
what's your plan.
I'm sorry, we're
I
gonna
just need to
Tell me, 'cause
respond
I don't
one
see you
time.
telling me any
President
plan.
Trump, this is
Multiple
now your third time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better. Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it.
You're crazy
so
with the
tonight,
dough.
9 years after you first started running, do you have
Even
a plan? And
even
can
the
you tell
people
us
that
what it
are
is?
Obamacare
that
was
are, like,
lousy health care. Always
giving them,
was.
like,
It's not very good
interviewing
today.
them, they were so
And what
done
I
with
said,
him,
that if
bro.
we come up
Everyone
with
in
something,
that room
and
is
we are
done with
working on
him.
things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it. But remember this,
Everyone
I
watching
inherited
is most probably
Obamacare
done
because
with him, bro.
Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it.
Stupid,
They were
bro.
unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare.
same
But the
thing,
Democrats came up,
over and
they wouldn't
over
vote
and
for it.
over again.
I had a choice to make when I was president. Remember this,
Everyone
I
watching
inherited
is most probably
Obamacare
done
because
with him, bro.
Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it.
Stupid,
They were
bro.
unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare.
same
But the
thing,
Democrats came up,
over and
they wouldn't
over
vote
and
for
over
it.
again.
I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We had some real bad ones too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan, distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run healthcare system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private healthcare options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff. As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being you don't like him, you said at the time, because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president and we over the last 4 years have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed for the first time Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of you, the American people. Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And the plan has to be to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not get rid of it,
Vice President Harris,
in terms of where Donald Trump stands on the
issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said that climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Sean Fain, who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and opening up auto plants, not closing them like happened under Donald Trump.
You're Joker. I'd do anything for you.
People believe Arthur Fleck to be some kind of martyr. Well, he's not.
You don't think this is me?
Welcome back tonight. The time has come for closing statements, and Vice President Harris, we begin with you.
Finally, we're done with this.
So I think you've heard tonight two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. And I do believe that the American people know we all have so much more in common than what separates us. And we can chart a new way forward. And a vision of that includes having a plan, understanding the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes, the ambition of the American people, which is why I intend to create an opportunity economy, investing in small businesses, in new families, in what we can do around protecting seniors, what we can do that is about giving hardworking folks a break and bringing down the cost of living. I believe in what we can do together that is about sustaining America's standing in the world and ensuring that we have the respect that we so rightly deserve, including respecting our military and ensuring we have the most lethal fighting force in the world. I will be a president that will protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. I'll tell you, I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a DA, I was an attorney general, a United States senator, and now vice president. I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
Vice President.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border.
He's
They've
not
had
a president.
3.5 years to
What are you talking
create
about?
jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like we're not going to frack. We're not going to take fossil fuel. We're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal energy plants. We're not ready for it. We can't sacrifice our country for the sake of bad vision.
Bro,
but I
he
just asked one
just
simple
made
question.
everything
Why
about
didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline.
He
We're being
definitely
laughed
lost
at
this
all
debate.
over the world.
He
All over the
definitely
world, they
lost this
laugh. I know
debate.
the leaders very well.
Every
They're
little
coming
part
to
of the
see me.
debate, he
They
lost
call
it.
me.
I'm sorry.
We're
There's,
laughed
I
at
don't think
all
I've
over the
ever
world.
heard.
They don't
I
understand
maybe
what
heard maybe
happened
2
to
or
us as a
3
nation. We're
good
not a
things that he
leader.
said.
We don't have
Out of
any
that, I haven't
idea
heard
what's
anything
going on.
good.
We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end up in a third world war, and it'll be a war like no other because of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt our entire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country.
Someone needs to do like a compilation of every single time he has said millions and billions.
President Trump, thank you. And that is our ABC News presidential debate from here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. I'm Lindsay Davis.
And I'm David Muir. Thank you for watching here in the U.S. and all over the world, and from all of us here at ABC News.